In 2021, WSOU's Election Night Show won the New York Press Club Award for Metro political coverage. Now, Election Night is back this Super Tuesday at 8 p.m. for one of the most important dates on the political calendar. Tune in for live results and hear our analysts break down the 2024 presidential election cycle only on 89.5 FM WSOU.
Hello and welcome to this Super Tuesday Election Night coverage show. I'm Ryan Henry, joined alongside David Holtzman. You'll be hearing from us and an array of WSOU newscasters for the next couple hours as we break down Super Tuesday Election Night results as they happen. Before we get into kind of breaking down everything that's happened before and how we got here today, how are you doing, David?
I'm doing okay. I kind of think it's politics as the sports for nerds. And the Super Tuesday primary is not quite the Super Bowl. We're going to get that in the fall. And a quick shameless plug for WSOU, you are going to want to tune in to WSOU's award-winning coverage of the 2024 election this November. Tonight is the preview. Tonight, we understand the primary itself is not going to be the most competitive. Joe Biden has already won, I'm looking right now, 4 primary states by margins of not less than 80 points. And it's a little bit more competitive in the Republican primary. But tonight is not the Super Bowl. But tonight, we're going to break down for you, the listeners, how we're going to get there, where we came from, what the big talking points are this election, and how we are going to go, what the path is to go from March to November. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing all right, and actually, I'm gonna spin things back. If you want to go for another analogy, it's for our college basketball listeners out there. This is kind of like every Thanksgiving they have these in-season tournaments before the season begins. You have the Maui Invitational, the Battle for Lance, the Ratty Children's Invitational, where you get a collection of these Bauer Conference teams to come together, play before Thanksgiving. It's not the Super Bowl, it's not the March Madness tournament, but it's a precursor to what we'll get to see later on this season. I think that's what we're dealing with right now here on Super Tuesday. So, kind of recapping everything before we get back into the swing of things. So, we are dealing with the Super Tuesday is when 16 states and 1 territory, American Samoa, is up for the primaries. But we've had a couple of primaries and caucuses before it. The Iowa caucus was the first one. Donald Trump won that in convincing fashion. Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy were still in the election, picked up a couple of delegates as well before they dropped out. Nikki Haley stayed in as well. She was the third candidate, had the third most delegates from that caucus with 8, picked up a couple in New Hampshire as well, a tightly contested race in terms of delegates. And then Donald Trump has really been taking over for the rest of this primary cycle leading up, with the exclusion of Washington, D.C., which Nikki Haley won just back on Monday. Right, so we know the Super Tuesday and also the purpose of our shows for our listeners. For the most part, we know what's going to happen, but I think we want this to serve as kind of a precursor for how we got here in general, the bigger storylines of, the Republican primary leading up to it, Joe Biden's presidency, and what can we expect for 2024, or expect in November.
That's exactly right. And we've curated the talking points for you tonight. So we're going to break down exactly each of those steps. So right after our opening segment, we're going to have Anthony Collins and Jorge Rivera on, and they're going to break down the first Republican candidates that dropped out after that Iowa caucus. In that Iowa caucus, on January 15th, Trump came away with 51% of the vote. It was a big talking point leading up to that caucus of, is Trump technically an incumbent? Now, he's not, because Biden is in the White House right now. But does Trump have incumbent? Do voters see Trump as having incumbent status? Well, in Iowa, arguably they did, giving him a majority of the vote, setting a few records for vote share. And right after that, Vivek Ramaswamy dropped out the same night. He got 7.6% of the vote. Not a surprise, as he ran along almost the exact same lines that Trump did. And then a few days later came the real surprise when Ron DeSantis dropped out. So we're going to break that down for you. Jorge and Anthony are going to break down the Ron DeSantis and the Vivek Ramaswamy campaigns. What did they do right? What did they do wrong? And why are they no longer in the race?
Yeah, and I want to give a little bit of a buffer before we head into our first break, because this is kind of an introduction of what we want to do and what we want to lay out. But leading up to it, so the big number of delegates, the magic number we're searching for the entire primary cycle is 1,215. 11% of those have already been decided in the previous primaries or caucuses. But the reason why tonight is called Super Tuesday is because 865 delegates will be dispersed out, shared out to the candidates. And actually, we already have a live result, at least on the Republican side, of one of the states already being decided. A couple already being called for. Donald Trump will win Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee. Now, certain states, the way this works out for those listening at home who may not be familiar, it's based on certain states. So certain states have outright. So if you win the state, you'll outright win all the delegates. Some it's based on a model of if you reach a certain threshold, and the rest it's like based on voter distribution. So we'll see how those delegates get split up, but that is what we're looking at right now. Like I mentioned before, Nikki Haley's only won D.C. Donald Trump has won every other state, most of them in convincing fashion. But David, if you have any other talking points, I think we can kind of take a quick little break, and then we can kind of send it over to Jorge and Anthony if they want to discuss, the previous the two candidates who were here, the two main candidates and other candidates who were involved in the primary but have dropped out, especially very early, because another talking point we can mention a little bit before we get into things. It's unprecedented for essentially the presidency or the candidate, especially of the non-incumbent party, although Trump is, like you said, maybe an incumbent, maybe not be, is already decided by this point.
Very, very rare. And Trump, with 200 plus delegates coming in tonight, can win another 865 delegates tonight. That's not going to add up if he wins all of them, which is possible. The really tight race we're going to watch tonight is Vermont. Results are already coming in. Trump is +6 now, but the New York Times Needle, which I consider the gold standard for predicting results, has Trump winning by just 0.6. So that's going to be your closest result tonight. In terms of, I want to break down a little bit of a preview for how tonight's going to look. So we already got a few states closed. We got Iowa, Virginia, Vermont, North Carolina, Tennessee. A number of those states have already been called, right? In terms of the Republican primary, Trump's already been called for Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee. Let's break down what's coming later tonight. At 8 o'clock, just 10 minutes ago, 4 more states closed. Alabama, Massachusetts, which is the most favorable state for Haley, except for Vermont, Maine, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and parts of Texas. Tennessee's already been called for Trump. 8:30, we're going to get Arkansas. 9 o'clock, Colorado, Minnesota, and the rest of Texas. At 10 o'clock, or between 10 and 11, we're going to get the close at Utah. 11 o'clock, and this is the one election that's real tonight. And depending on how late we go, maybe we'll have results. California closes at 11. The Democrat primary for Senate in California to replace the late Dianne Feinstein is going to determine tonight who will be the next senator for California. That's maybe the most practical race to come away with tonight. And finally, Alaska's not going to close until 12 o'clock. But until then, we got the analysts in studio to break down all of these topics.
Yeah, we definitely do, and I'm excited to get into it. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to play some regular rotation music, but we'll come back. Anthony and Jorge will be back, and we'll break down the other Republican candidates who failed to make, not failed, but who were also in this race and eventually had dropped out. Nikki Haley will get her own separate section later on. You've been listening to WSU's Election Night coverage. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.